It's okay. So what that is, that's kind of a spin-off from the UN. It's a non-governmental organization that is made up of governments, of local governments. So it's kind of interesting. And it's the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. But it's called ICLEI. But they've recently changed their name because I think they don't like the idea of people knowing that they're international. And now they call themselves ICLEI, which stands for nothing, and Local Governments for Sustainability. And what ICLEI does is it's sort of a policy and legislation arm, kind of the UN. It is international. It's in 70 countries, and they say they represent 583 million people. And in California, it's 100. I believe it's 101 cities and 11 counties that are members. But what they do is they have greenhouse gas protocols, which they actually sell to different communities. They will, for a fee, measure your greenhouse gas output and help you make goals so that you can reduce it. Like, for instance, Sonoma County in 2009 voted to give $83,000 to ICLEI to develop a program for them. And this is common. You see this, throughout the U.S. So, yeah, ICLEI is a non-governmental organization that's actually made up of local government individuals. So, like your regional boards, which, if you don't like the way, first of all, our country is developed on, the sense of we're federal, state, and local, right? But then regional, if you don't like the regional board, you can vote whoever it is that's in your community who's on it, you can vote them off, except they change from time to time. But you're not really going to affect the board itself, So you're not really, you don't really have any control over this regional board. And this is, local, ICLEI is local, and and so it develops these protocols, and you find that you have people, who are bouncing back and forth between private companies and private nonprofit groups, and then they're going into government. And so when you have that, you're having, you don't have as much control over your legislation and what's happening in your community because you don't really control who it is who's supposedly representing you. And they're saying that they're representing like 583 million people, but hardly anyone's ever heard of them. You don't even, right? And so this is a real problem. We can't really affect change within these groups because, first of all, half the time people are saying you're a conspiracy theorist if you're even talking about it, which is totally silly. It's kind of ridiculous, I'm sure you've done some research. It's not like I'm making this up,
Yeah. So, and that definitely clears up for me, like the whole ICLEI connection. I'm curious. I have done a lot of research on it, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the connection between Agenda 21 and the private property issue, or the land rights issue. I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around that. So can you explain that aspect of it?
Sure. Agenda 21, it's divided into 40 chapters. It's a 300-page document. And by the way, a lot of these things sound great, and I'm telling you, I'm coming out of the left myself, and I've considered myself to be an environmentalist and a liberal, and no matter what label you put on things, you really have to take a look at how they're being implemented. And part of Agenda 21 is implementation. I think it's like the 40th chapter, the last 3 or 4 chapters are about implementation. And this is where, we need to be concerned. It's primarily a land use and transportation document. And the way that it works is that, I gave you the basic premise that because you get, the concept is that you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because they're having an impact on the environment. And this is what ICLEI says is this is an extremely urgent, something that's an emergency, it needs to be dealt with immediately. It cannot wait. And so the idea is you've got to bring all the people in, anyone who's driving a distance, you've got to bring those people into the centers of cities, off of their rural land and out of their suburbs and into densely populated city centers in order to get them to transportation, so you can get them out of their vehicle. So that's part of the property rights and land use issue, because you don't just, thank goodness in our country we don't just walk up to people and hold a gun to their head and say, hey, get off your land, you're coming with me. But so it's the break your arm incentive, right? That says, okay, well, we're going to put so many restrictions on you if you're living out in a rural area. Or we're not, for instance, in Sonoma County is saying now that it's not going to be paving. I think there are 1,384 miles of roads in Sonoma County, but they've just announced a few months ago that they were only going to be paving 150 miles of those roads in the future. So that's really a serious thing, right? Because how are you going to get out to your property? And if you're in a suburban area and your schools are closing, or you're not able to get services out there anymore, this is, going to, make people move. And this is the plan, is to, through restrictions, through rules, regulations, you might have scenic corridors, biotic resource corridors, increased restrictions in how you can do your ranching, farming, and animal raising, so that more and more people who are just, your average kind of funky guy out there with this little farm or whatever, those people are not able to afford to stay out on their land anymore. And I think this should be a real big concern for people who are localvores. This isn't like a boutique kind of thing. You've got people out there making their living and working generations on their land. And this is important to us here in Sonoma County. We want our food local. But when people are facing restrictions that are so incredibly difficult for them to comply with and so expensive for them to comply with, they're not able to afford to keep their land. And then you have that land passing into open space, or maybe some big guy is going to buy up 10,000 acres of it, and I don't know what they're planning to do with it. But, then you have restrictions on, just your community, and you find that that changes, land use decisions, even if you don't own any land yourself, even if you live in an apartment on a transportation line and you love it. That's cool. That's your choice. But a lot of people choose, they want to live out on the land, they want to have animals, they want to grow food, they want to bring that food to market. And those people are, finding that it's less and less possible for them. And this is part of Agenda 21.
Interesting. So it's more like a policy-oriented or a policy-driven alteration in sort of land use rights, as opposed to, like you said, someone coming in and saying, I'm taking your land away from you.
Right, which they do also because, in redevelopment areas, they have the right of eminent domain, which means that they can just go up to you and say, hey, your area has, there's 1,100 acres. I don't know if you can conceive of how big that is, but that's like miles in each direction. 1,100 acres that are blighted through the center of Santa Rosa, and plus all the other redevelopment areas that are in Santa Rosa, which is like several thousand more acres, And then, in those areas, the city can just go up to you and say, hey, we're taking you by eminent domain. We've got the right to do it. And they do. And you've already lost your property rights there. That's the reality. So, yes, the thing is that with that Growing Smart legislative guidebook, and also with ICLEI, they provide sample legislation and sample ordinances for your community. So that's where, that's where all these communities are getting this stuff. They don't have to come up with it on their own. It's given to them in, they're given sample legislation, sample ordinances, sample statutes, and then they implement them. And if you're like me and you're here in Sonoma County because you think it's really great and it's real and it's funky and it encourages people to be individuals and we have a beautiful natural environment here, you don't want to see your community look like every single other community in the Bay Area and every other community in the U.S., right? If you wonder why, hey, how come how come so many of these commercial developments all have like a Panda Express and a Jamba Juice and a blah blah blah, right? They all they all have the same thing, right? Well, hey, believe it or not, if they're in redevelopment areas, part of what redevelopment says is that you're blighted if you have too many local businesses. Too many local businesses is blight. So then you have all these national retailers. The deal is this is really a corporatocracy we're talking about, and they have greenwashed it. They're making it look cool. If it didn't look cool, we wouldn't be, so many of us going for it,
Yeah. And that kind of leads into my last question, which is, this is for the green issue, for the Bohemian, but what about sustainability, climate change, and the things that we should be doing right now as a society to address that? What's your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a sustainability issue, or is this like you said, a corporatocracy redevelopment issue?
I think, unfortunately, it's so interwoven, it's really not possible at this point to separate them. Because, for instance, my partner is a general contractor. Back when she was, we're kind of old hippies, and back in the 70s and 80s, she built an entire house, a 2-story house out of recycled materials. And we have, we're part of a movement of people who, is into reuse, recycle and reuse. And, you need to think about environmental issues and how we can best protect our water and our air and our natural environment. This is part of what we value as Americans. And I think that is very important. But I think that you do have a corporatocracy that has run around and gotten in front of the green movement. And I do think there's a real problem here also with progressives. I don't even know what that stands for anymore. I'm a Democrat, have been for my entire voting life. But, I've been demonized and, and had to deal with a lot of abuse from the Democratic Party, which is sort of bizarre. I'm like, hey, why aren't they on board with me on this?
Like in Sonoma, the Democratic Party in Sonoma County?
Yeah. And well, I'm the one who reported Michael Allen to the FPPC for serious conflict of interest, and he was found guilty of of those allegations, and he did have to pay a fine. I'm sorry that he's a Democrat, why should I look the other way because someone is in my political party? I think being a liberal, as a liberal watching this, being implemented mainly by progressives, I have to say I don't care what label you wear. When it's authoritarianism, we don't have any place for that in the United States.